Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I begin with rather terrifying news coming from the Senegalese president, Macky Sall, who says 11 newborn babies have died in a hospital fire in the western city of Tivwane. President Sall tweeted that this incident had occurred at the maternity department of the Mam Abu Aziz C. Dabka Hospital. The city's mayor, Demba Diop, says 3 babies were saved. In a statement later, the country's health ministry said an emergency response plan had been put in place and arrangements are being made for the assistance of the families of the victims. Meanwhile, President Sall was given a warm welcome at the presidential palace in Luanda, the Angolan capital, for day one of his 3-day visit to the country. The trip is the first by a Senegalese head of state to Angola. The aim of the visit is to boost friendly relations between the two countries following the opening of an Angolan embassy in Dakar. President Sall, who is also the acting president of the African Union, was received by his counterpart, while Lorenzo. The two heads of state are calling for reform of the UN Security Council, which has no African country as a permanent member. Several cooperation agreements were signed with an emphasis on the partnership for oil exploration. President Sall also announced he would follow the Angolan example and open a Senegalese embassy in Luanda. Firefighters have contained a large blaze that erupted in a cargo area of the port in Sudan. The director of the Sudanese Red Sea port of Swakin, Taha Ahmed Mukhtar, reported this via social media. The fire, which raged for hours, broke out in the cargo drop-off area of the port on Wednesday, sending plumes of acrid smoke into the sky. It's not immediately clear what caused the blaze, but he said an investigation had been launched to determine the cause of the fire and a commission set up to assess the scale of the losses. A port official who spoke on condition of anonymity had earlier described the damage as catastrophic. The blaze at the port came as Sudan is gripped by a chronic economic crisis, which deepened after last year's military coup led by Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. And the UN Special Representative, the Special Representative of the Secretary General in Somalia, James Swan, has told the Security Council that the conclusion of Somalia's electoral process last week was, quote, a major milestone for the country, calling on Somalia's leaders to move beyond the prolonged political contest to focus on urgent national priorities. Mr. Swan said the presidential contest followed an unduly protracted and contentious process to choose members of the legislature. A special representative said outgoing President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed Farmajo had graciously conceded and congratulated and extended his support to the successor, and the new president was immediately sworn in, and the outcome has been fully accepted. The humanitarian situation in Somalia continues to worsen following the failure of a 4th consecutive rainy season. The number of people affected by the drought has risen to 6.1 million. The country faces a heightened risk of localized famine in 6 communities if food prices continue to rise and humanitarian assistance is not sustained.
This is the 4th consecutive drought that we see since 2011, since the famine. The food prices are going up. The COVID impact is still there. The climate change is there. And also conflict continues to be. So we have all the 4 C's in addition to the Ukraine crisis. Commodity prices have almost doubled in Somalia, and in some parts 93% high. The humanitarian appeal for Somalia is only 15% funded. So what we need now is money. We need the cash to avert the risk of famine. In 2011, famine, I think about 250,000 people died. So if we don't act now with the money that we need, I think we might head into that kind of direction.
Over in Tunisia, President Kais Saied has issued a decree calling voters to a referendum on a new constitution on July 25th. According to an official notice, there will be one question on whether people agree with the new constitution. It says the polls will start at 6 in the morning and end at 10 in the evening. It comes as President Said named an advisory committee to draft a new constitution for a new republic amid opposition's calls to reverse the move. The country's main political parties say they will boycott dialogue on the formation of the new constitution and term the president's action unilateral. Well, Gambia says it will prosecute former President Yahya Jammeh for murder, rape, torture and other alleged crimes committed during his more than 20-year rule. The Ministry of Justice said on Wednesday it accepted all but 2 of the 265 recommendations made by a commission that probed alleged crimes committed by the state under the despotic former leader from July 1994 to January 2017. Mr. Jammeh is currently living in exile in Equatorial Guinea, which has no extradition treaty with the Gambia. The government says it would prosecute all 70 alleged perpetrators named in the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission's twice-delayed report, including former Vice President Isatou Njie Saidi and members of the so-called Junglers Hit Squad. The United Kingdom is willing to channel some of the country's special drawing rights through the African Development Bank. The strong mechanisms need to be developed. Speaking at the AFDB's 57th annual meetings holding in Accra, Ghana, a Deputy Director of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, Vicky Ford, calls on other advanced economies to support the move, as the UK is legally unable to do this by itself. While recognizing the work of the bank, she says due to the present legal challenges, she encourages the AFDB to continue to find other ways to secure funding. African leaders have called for the reallocation of the International Monetary Fund's SDRs to regional multilateral development banks such as the AFDB to better support countries in the region.
To hear that.
As agreed by the G20 finance ministers last year, the UK has been actively exploring the possibility of channeling some SDRs through the multilateral development banks, including the African Development Bank. And so let me be very clear, the UK would like to channel some of our SDRs through the African Development Bank. We really welcome the bank's efforts to develop options for these SDRs. We'll continue to have many discussions, I know, in the margins of this week's meetings. But for the options to be viable, we and other partners need to design mechanisms that meet our legal requirements for maintaining the reserve asset status of SDRs. And we also want to ensure that they have the largest possible impact on the bank's lending capacity, that leverage that the President just mentioned. And now this is where it gets complicated, because to meet the legal requirements, we can't channel those SDRs into the African Development Bank by ourselves. We need a group of countries to come and do so together. So we in the UK are obviously encouraging other developed countries to join us on that journey. But because of these legal hurdles and challenges, I really do urge the bank to continue to explore other innovative ways to mobilize finance.
South African police say they are on high alert following an incident in which 3 men accused of being drug dealers were burnt alive inside a house by a mob. The victims were aged between 22 and 36. Community members followed the 3 men to their rented house in Ga Mokofa section in Northwest Province and pelted it with stones. The police said the men allegedly stabbed and injured some of the attackers while attempting to escape, but they were forced back to the house before it was set alight. Provincial Commissioner Lieutenant General Selo Kwena termed the incident inhumane, totally unacceptable, and must be condemned. So far, no one has been arrested over the matter. Kenya's Deputy President William Ruto has asked President Uhuru Kenyatta for forgiveness after the pair fell out following their re-election in 2018. The president does not support Mr. Ruto's bid for the presidency in August election and has instead thrown his weight behind opposition leader Raila Odinga. Mr. Ruto made his comments at an annual prayer breakfast meeting organized by Parliament with Mr. Kenyatta in the audience. The deputy president addressed the gathering, asking Kenyans for forgiveness for any of the government's shortcomings, and then went on to refer to Mr. Kenyatta as his good friend and to wish the president a peaceful retirement. Mr. Kenyatta, who's finishing his second and last term this year, did not react to Mr. Ruto's comments. And the United Nations says more than 80,000 people displaced by clashes in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo are in urgent need of food. Fighting between government soldiers and M23 rebels has intensified in recent weeks in North Kivu province, and humanitarian agencies fear the worst for the refugees if the hostilities continue. The UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs says that those displaced have fled to improvised sites, churches and schools. A statement from the spokesperson for the province's governor said they were faced with this very worrying situation. The U.S. pharmaceutical giant Pfizer has announced it will sell some of its patented drugs at non-profit prices to the world's poorest countries. A non-profit price will take into account the cost to manufacture and transport each product to the port of entry. Launching the initiative at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Pfizer said it would focus on infectious diseases, cancer, inflammation, rare illnesses, and women's health. The company's COVID-19 vaccine and antiviral treatments are included in the scheme. 5 African countries, including Rwanda, Senegal, and Uganda, will be the first beneficiaries.
Can you share with us how this...
Pfizer is excited and proud to launch an accord for a healthier world. Through this groundbreaking initiative, Pfizer will provide all its patented medicines and vaccines that are available in the US or in the European Union on a non-for-profit basis to 1.2 billion people living in 45 lower-income countries. This includes all 27 low-income countries, as well as all 18 countries that have transitioned from low-income to lower middle-income classification in the last 10 years.
Pfizer's commitment under the Accord program sets a new standard in this regard, which we hope to see emulated by others, combined with additional investments in strengthening Africa's public health systems and pharmaceutical regulators. Accord is an important step towards sustainable health security for countries at every income level.
Global health equity has made progress. We saw once again with COVID, we're not there. Whether it was getting the vaccines or now getting the therapeutics out, it's a lot of hard work. Some excellent things are being done, for example, with Paxlovid to make sure that's going to get out. So we're pleased to be working with Pfizer, and we're talking to the entire pharmaceutical industry about these kinds of initiatives and how we can broaden them as part of the whole ESG effort.
The United Nations has been examining the gains and pains of humanitarian work in conflict areas. According to a top UN humanitarian officer at a Security Council meeting, conflict continued to cause widespread civilian death and injury in 2021, with the risks rising sharply in urban areas and civilians being the worst hit and most affected.
The risks are first and most fundamentally, conflict continued to cause widespread civilian death and injury last year. When hostilities took place in densely populated areas, the risks of death and injury for civilians rose sharply. When explosive weapons were used in populated areas, about 90% of casualties were civilians, compared to 10% in other areas.
The European Union to the United Nations to participate in this meeting.
We're all too familiar with the cycle of violence and displacement, and 2021 was no exception. By mid-year, fighting and insecurity had forcibly displaced 84 million people, with close to 51 million of them internally displaced. As UNHCR reported over the weekend, and the Ukraine war and other conflicts have now pushed the number of people forced to flee conflict, violence, human rights violations, and persecution to over 100 million for the first time on record. Humanitarian workers and assets also came under attack. Last year, some 143 security incidents against humanitarian workers were recorded in 14 countries and territories affected by conflict. These resulted in the death of 93 workers. National staff accounted for 98% of humanitarians killed, injured, or kidnapped. This year is looking no better.
For his briefing, I now give the floor to Ms. Raquel Bokita.
Jammeh Biotech, a Ghanaian cancer research and diagnostics startup, wants to expand the world's knowledge of how cancer affects people of African descent. Only 2% of genomic study participants are of African descent. The company is seeking a cure by studying more African samples.
In the open-air kitchenette of a small research clinic in Ghana's capital, Accra, pathologist Kafui Akapo carefully carves a piece of cancerous breast tissue into a sample smaller than a matchbox. Hundreds of other samples bob around him in plastic jars of formaldehyde. But this one would soon begin a journey across town to Jammeh Biotech, a homegrown research and diagnostic startup that Akapo thinks could change African cancer studies forever.
Even though breast cancer has been studied extensively throughout the world, the truth is that most of the cases are not Africans. If you look at every study across the world, there are very few of them who are Africans. So what this does is that you come to the African population and study it, and that has effects on African Americans and any other group that has a basis in Africa. That's why this is so important. Without it, you don't have enough to relate to African breast cancer. Most of it is actually in a white population and not in an African population.
Hard data on cancer in Africa is scarce. While more than 17% of the world's population calls the continent home, only 2% of genomic study participants are of African descent. That's according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Jammeh Biotech aims to change that by constructing a first-of-its-kind genomic archive of cancers in black people from around the world.
The reason Jammeh is focused on cancer is partly because no one else is looking at cancer in Africa. All our research, or majority of our research, is focused on infectious diseases. And yet we have one of the world's fastest growing burdens of cancer. And we have some of the highest cancer mortality rates anywhere in the world. So as much as HIV and malaria are problems, cancer is a huge problem, and it's actually a problem that is growing faster than those other problems. So I felt that for a new company starting out, we needed to focus on an area that was really important, but also was less traveled.
After emerging from Silicon Valley's prestigious Y Combinator Fund at the dawn of the pandemic, Jammeh's Ghanaian founders quickly established what has become the most advanced genomic research laboratory in Ghana. As one of the country's only labs equipped for molecular analysis, Bediako's team have tasked themselves with collecting data they believe will aid the development of precision medicine for cancer patients throughout the continent and diaspora. Akapo is aiding in a study of the various kinds of breast cancer affecting black women. Another will aim to sequence every type of childhood cancer in Ghana later this year. Jammeh also recently launched Ghana's first home testing kit for human papillomavirus, one of the leading causes of cervical cancer. Investors are taking note. In just over a year, Jammeh has raised about $3 million in seed funding, mostly from African investors. That's besides the $1 million grants the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have committed to investigate responses to COVID-19 vaccines in Ghanaian adults. Most treatments were started on a lab table, and staff of Jammeh believe to find a cure for Africans, research must be done in Africa on Africans.
Finally on the program, your award-winning your multiple award-winning station, Channels Television, has emerged as Brand Africa's Most Admired Nigerian Brand Award in a ceremony held in Lagos, where Dangote Group, MTN and others also emerged winners. The results were collated from direct feedback from consumers across Africa using Geopol. Our correspondent, Olumide Macaulay, reports.
The venue in Lagos stands stark against the sky majestic. Like a maestro, the violinist serenades the guests in the foyer. Who the cap fits, let them wear it. The real thrones for the occasion are for some of those seated in the hall, who will emerge as the best brands in Africa.
It's been a wonderful journey, Brand Africa.
A panel ensues which reveal how the best brands are chosen from a Pan-African survey across at least 28 countries that account for over 80% of Africa's population and GDP, using direct mobile web methodology conducted by Geopol.
We've run mobile surveys in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, basically. And we also have about a database of about 250 million people.
The Deputy Governor, Financial System Stability, Central Bank of Nigeria, Aisha Ahmed, delivering the keynote address virtually from Abuja.
Africa has indeed evolved, and through this evolution, the continent continues to rediscover itself and its potential.
Passion for African brands resonates in the speech of the chairman of Brand Africa, South African Tebi Ikalafeng.
Our challenge as Africans is we reject everything that is made in Africa because we think that anything that is not made in Africa elevates us. Our job is to create and to share with the world who we are.
Nigeria's finest marketing communications practitioners.
The big reveal, as the Africa Brand Leadership Excellence Award in Industry goes to advertising doyen, Chairman, Troika Group, Dr. Biodun Shobanjo.
51 years ago, when I ventured into the profession that was to define who I eventually became, I'd been carried away by the exploits of such great men as Leo Burnett, Rosa Reeves, David Ogilvy, and Bill Bamberg, to mention a few.
Other brands that won awards include Dangote Group for Most Admired Brand that symbolizes African pride, GT Bank for Most Admired Financial Services Brand, MTN for #1 brand building African country,
AIT, NTA, #1 most admired Nigerian brand, Channels TV.
And your darling TV station, Channels Television, for Most Admired Nigerian Media Brand. Received by the AGM Operations, Channels Television, Mr. Kingsley Uranta, and Company Secretary, Mrs. Diola Lumio.
We are particularly grateful to Brand Africa and the trustees for choosing Channels Television and for making us this honor. Rest assured, as Africa's most decorated media organization, we would continue to ensure that we entrench or help to entrench good governance, responsible journalism, responsible citizenry in the interest of our country, our dear country, Nigeria, our dear continent, Africa, and indeed the rest of the world. And to our viewers all over the world, thank you for believing in us. Thank you so much indeed.
Some of the criteria used in the survey to choose the best brands in Africa include acceptability, credibility, reliability, and efficiency. If 83% of brands admired by Africans are non-African, and only 17% of brands admired by Africans are indeed African, as statistics suggest, then the brands chosen tonight as Africa's best brands are blazing a trail for others to follow. Olumide Macaulay, Channels Television News.
That's just another feather to her cap. Thank you again for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.